My name is Grant Wexler, and I'm 35 years old. For the past decade, I've been building something meaningful in the transportation industry here in Denver, Colorado. My brother Jake and I started our family holding company from nothing, working 18-hour days and reinvesting every dollar back into the business. We specialized in logistics solutions for mid-sized manufacturing companies across the Midwest, and by 2019, we were pulling in 7 figures annually. I met Tessa at a networking event in downtown Denver. She was 27, worked in marketing for a tech startup, and had this infectious laugh that could light up a room. We dated for 2 years before I proposed in 2020. The wedding was everything she wanted. A destination ceremony in Napa Valley, 200 guests, and a reception that cost more than most people make in a year. I didn't mind the expense. I was making good money, and I wanted her to be happy. What Tessa didn't know, what nobody knew except Jake and our attorney, was that I had structured everything very carefully before we even got engaged. Back in 2017, 3 years before I met her, I had established a family trust and LLC structure on my father's advice. The house in Cherry Hills Village, the BMW X7, my portfolio of municipal bonds and tech stocks, even the vintage Rolex my grandfather left me. Everything was held under the family trust. I had watched too many successful men get cleaned out in divorce court. My father always told me, "Son, hope for the best, but plan for the worst." I took that advice to heart. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new, unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. The first 3 years of our marriage were genuinely good. Tessa seemed content with our life together. We took trips to Europe. She drove her Mercedes C-Class that I had purchased for her as a wedding gift, and we hosted dinner parties at our 4-bedroom house. She knew I was successful, but I never flaunted the full extent of our assets. I lived comfortably, but not extravagantly. She assumed we had maybe $500,000 in total assets. The reality was closer to $3 million. By early 2024, our 4th year of marriage, I started noticing changes. Tessa would come home late from work, claiming client dinners or team meetings. She became secretive about her phone, taking calls in the other room and quickly closing her laptop when I walked by. When I asked about her day, her answers became vague and rehearsed. She stopped initiating conversations about our future. No more talk about kids or buying a bigger house. Then came the call that changed everything. Jake phoned me at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday in March 2024. Our biggest client, representing nearly 40% of our revenue, was terminating their contract effective immediately. They had been acquired by a competitor who used their own in-house logistics team. Just like that, our cash flow was gutted. Jake and I made the hard decision to sell 30% of our stake to a larger transportation firm to keep the company afloat. It was the right move long-term, but it meant I had to step back from day-to-day operations. The new partners wanted their own management team in place. I was essentially forced out of the company I had built from scratch, though I retained my ownership percentage and would still receive distributions. I came home that evening and told Tessa what had happened. I explained that while my income would be reduced temporarily, we had plenty of savings, and the business would likely be worth more in the long run under new management. I expected support, maybe some reassurance that we would get through this together. Instead, I saw something in her eyes I had never seen before: calculation. 3 days later, Tessa dropped the bomb. I was in my home office reviewing financial statements when she walked in and sat down across from my desk. No preamble, no emotion in her voice. "I want a divorce, Grant." I looked up from my laptop. "What? This isn't working anymore. I think we both know that." She crossed her arms and stared at me with cold determination. "I've already contacted a lawyer." I set down my reading glasses. "Tessa, where is this coming from? I know the business situation is stressful, but we can work through this." "It's not about the business," she said, though we both knew that was a lie. I need something different. I need space to figure out what I want." "Space? I'm moving out this weekend. I found a place." That's when the pieces clicked into place. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the emotional distance. You're seeing someone. She didn't deny it. She didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. His name is Lucas Reed. He works at my company. We've been close for the past few months. Close, I repeated, while you've been married to me. Grant, let's not make this uglier than it needs to be. I want this to be amicable. We can split everything 50-50, sell the house, divide the accounts. You'll be fine. I almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. She had cheated on me, was abandoning our marriage for her coworker, and expected me to hand over half of everything I had built. What she didn't realize was that there was nothing to split. Legally speaking, almost nothing we owned was actually ours. I see, I said calmly. And you've thought this through? Of course I have. Colorado is an equitable distribution state. I'm entitled to half of all marital assets. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. My lawyer says it should be straightforward since we don't have kids. Your lawyer. David Rodriguez. He handles divorces for several people at my company. He says cases like ours usually settle within 60 days. I nodded slowly. Well, I suppose I should get my own attorney then. That would probably be best. She paused at the doorway. For what it's worth, Grant, I did love you once. And then she was gone. I sat in my office for a long time after that conversation, not angry, just calculating. I called Jake first. She wants a divorce, I told him. Jesus, Grant, I'm sorry, man. What are you going to do? Nothing dramatic. I'm going to let her play her hand. What do you mean? She thinks she's entitled to half of everything. She has no idea what everything actually is. The prenup. We never signed one. I didn't need to. Jake was quiet for a moment. The trust structure. Exactly. She's about to learn the difference between marital property and separate property the hard way. My next call was to Robert Mitchell, the attorney who had helped me set up the family trust and LLC structure back in 2017. I explained the situation. Let me guess, Robert said. She assumes that the house, cars, and investments are marital assets. That would be correct. Well, they're not. The house is owned by the trust, which you established in 2017, 3 years before you met her. The BMW is registered to the LLC. Your investment accounts are in the trust's name. Even that Rolex is documented as an inheritance held in trust. What about her car? The Mercedes is titled to you personally, purchased with your separate funds as a wedding gift. Technically, it remains your separate property. And joint accounts? What joint accounts? You never established any joint accounts. She had access to your personal checking account for household expenses with a debit card, but that account remains solely in your name. I smiled for the first time in days. Exactly. Grant, I have to ask, did you plan this? I planned for this possibility. There's a difference. That weekend, I watched from my home office window as Tessa loaded her clothes into Lucas Reed's Honda Accord. He was exactly what I expected. Mid-30s, receding hairline, trying too hard to look successful in his discount suit. He kept checking his phone and glancing nervously at the house. Tessa moved with purpose, filling garbage bags with her belongings like she was fleeing a crime scene. She left her keys to the house and Mercedes on the kitchen counter along with a note. Grant, I hope we can handle this like adults. My attorney will be in touch with yours soon. Tessa. I poured myself 2 fingers of Maker's Mark and toasted my empty house. Phase 1 was complete. Tessa had played exactly the hand I expected her to play. Now it was time to let the legal system do what it does best, enforce the law. 2 weeks later, Robert Mitchell called me with an update. I just received a call from David Rodriguez, your wife's attorney. Ex-wife, I corrected. Right. Anyway, he's demanding financial disclosure. He wants bank statements, property deeds, investment account summaries, the works. He also mentioned that Mrs. Wexler is requesting temporary spousal support during the proceedings. Temporary spousal support? Apparently she can't afford her share of the rent at Mr. Reed's apartment. She's not working since leaving your house. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. What did you tell him? That we'd be happy to provide full disclosure of all marital assets. I'm preparing the response now. How long until they realize? Oh, I'd say about 5 minutes after Rodriguez opens the file. Robert's prediction was accurate. 3 days later, my phone rang at 8 in the morning. I could hear Tessa's voice in the background, clearly agitated. "Mr. Wexler," Rodriguez said, "I think there's been some kind of mistake with the documentation your attorney provided." "What kind of mistake?" "Well, according to these records, you don't actually own any significant marital property. The house is held in a family trust established in 2017. The BMW is registered to an LLC. Your investment accounts predate the marriage and are also held in trust. Is this accurate?" I took a sip of my coffee. "It is." "I see. And the joint accounts?" "There are no joint accounts, Mr. Rodriguez. My wife had access to my personal checking account for household expenses via a debit card I gave her, but there were never any joint accounts established." I could hear Tessa shouting in the background. Something about, "This can't be legal," and "He's hiding assets." "Mr. Wexler, my client is quite upset. She feels that you may have deliberately concealed the true nature of your holdings." "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm curious. Did your client tell you that I established the trust structure in 2017, 3 years before we even met?" Silence. "Did she mention that all of this information was available in public records? That she could have researched the property ownership at any time during our marriage?" More silence. "The trust documents are filed with Jefferson County. The LLC registration is with the Colorado Secretary of State. Everything is completely transparent and legal." I heard Tessa grab the phone. "Grant, this is bullshit and you know it. You can't just hide everything in some trust." "I didn't hide anything, Tessa. I protected my assets using standard legal instruments that existed 3 years before I knew you. Your attorney can explain the difference." "But we're married. I'm entitled to half." "You're entitled to half of the marital assets. The trust assets aren't marital property because they weren't acquired during the marriage. They were acquired years before I ever met you." The line went dead. Robert called me an hour later, chuckling. "Rodriguez just requested a meeting. He wants to discuss a reasonable settlement." "What's reasonable to them?" "They're asking for the Mercedes and $50,000 in cash, plus temporary alimony of $3,000 a month." "Counteroffer?" I told him we'd consider letting her keep the clothes she took. Meanwhile, I had been quietly documenting everything. Lucas Reed had made this easy for me by posting constantly on social media. His Instagram was a gold mine. Photos of him and Tessa at restaurants during what should have been work hours, pictures from their weekend trips to Aspen and Boulder, selfies taken in what was clearly my house while I was out of town on business. The metadata on the photos showed dates going back to October 2023, 5 months before Tessa had asked for the divorce. I also discovered something interesting about Lucas through Jake's friend, who worked in the same building as Tessa's marketing firm. Lucas had been laid off from 2 previous jobs for performance issues. His current position was already on shaky ground. Apparently, he had a reputation for office relationships and cutting corners on client work. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in downtown Denver. I wore my best suit, the charcoal Tom Ford I had bought for client meetings. Tessa showed up in a dress I had bought her for our 2nd anniversary, now looking slightly worn. The irony wasn't lost on me. Judge Patricia Hendricks reviewed the case file while we waited. She was known for being no-nonsense and had a reputation for cutting through legal theatrics quickly. "Mr. Rodriguez," Judge Hendricks said, "I've reviewed your client's petition. She's requesting equitable distribution of marital assets, temporary spousal support, and attorney's fees. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And Mr. Mitchell, your client disputes these claims?" "We do, Your Honor. We contend that there are virtually no marital assets to distribute." Judge Hendricks looked at Tessa. "Mrs. Wexler, were you aware of your husband's trust and LLC structure when you married?" Tessa shifted uncomfortably. No, Your Honor. I mean, not really. Not really. I knew he was successful, but I didn't know about all the legal arrangements." "I see. And during your 4-year marriage, did you contribute financially to the acquisition or improvement of any of these assets?" I paid for groceries sometimes with the debit card he gave me, and I helped with decorating the house. But you didn't contribute to the mortgage payments which are paid by the trust? No, Your Honor. Or to the vehicle payments made by the LLC? No. Judge Hendricks made some notes. Mr. Rodriguez, do you have any evidence that your client made substantial financial contributions to the acquisition or improvement of the trust assets? Rodriguez shuffled through his papers. We believe that Mrs. Wexler's domestic contributions during the marriage should be considered. Mr. Rodriguez, domestic contributions don't transform separate property established years before marriage into marital property. You should know this. The hearing lasted 23 minutes. Judge Hendricks delivered her preliminary ruling 2 days later. No spousal support, no equitable distribution of trust assets, no attorney's fees. Tessa would be allowed to keep her personal belongings, and that was it. The final hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out, but Robert assured me it would be a formality. She can appeal, he said over lunch at the Brown Palace Hotel, but she has no grounds. Colorado law is very clear on separate property versus marital property, especially when the assets predate the marriage by years. What about her attorney? Rodriguez is already backpedaling. He's telling people this was a complex asset protection case that was impossible to predict. Translation, he didn't do his homework and he's embarrassed. Meanwhile, life was delivering its own justice. 2 weeks after the preliminary hearing, Jake called me with news. You remember Lucas Reed? Tessa's boyfriend? What about him? He got fired yesterday. Apparently his last 3 client campaigns were disasters. Lost the agency nearly $200,000 in billing. I had to ask, any idea why his performance suddenly declined? Word is he's been distracted lately. Relationship drama, financial stress from supporting 2 people on his salary. His supervisor said he's been making careless mistakes and missing deadlines. I wasn't surprised. Lucas had gone from bachelor living to supporting himself and Tessa on a marketing associate's salary that probably barely covered his own previous expenses. The stress was clearly affecting his work performance. The real poetic justice came the following week. I was having coffee at Starbucks near my house when my phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Grant, we need to talk. This is Tessa. I deleted it. An hour later, another message. Grant, please, I made a mistake. Can we work this out? Deleted. That evening. I know you're getting these messages. Lucas lost his job. I can't afford my share of the apartment rent. Please call me. I poured myself a whiskey and watched the Broncos game. The messages continued for 3 days, each one more desperate than the last. I'll drop the divorce. We can try counseling. I never loved him. I'll sign a postnup. On Thursday, she showed up at my house. I watched through the window as she got out of an Uber. She no longer had access to the Mercedes. She looked tired, older somehow. Her hair was different, a cheaper cut with drugstore color. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by bargain store basics. She rang the doorbell. I didn't answer. She knocked. I turned up the television. She called my name through the door. I went to the kitchen and made a sandwich. Finally, I heard her footsteps retreating down the driveway. The final divorce hearing was held on a cold Tuesday in November 2024. Tessa showed up with a different attorney, a young public defender who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Rodriguez had dropped her as a client, citing inability to pay legal fees. Judge Hendricks made it official in less than 10 minutes. No alimony, no property distribution, each party responsible for their own attorney's fees. The marriage was dissolved. As we walked out of the Jefferson County Courthouse, Tessa tried one last approach. Grant, wait. I kept walking toward my BMW. Grant, please, I'm living in a studio apartment in Aurora. I'm working at a call center. I can barely afford groceries. I reached my car and got in. She knocked on the window. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. But we had 4 good years. Doesn't that count for something? I started the engine. Through the windshield, I could see her crying. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the calculation in her eyes when I told her about losing my position. I remembered how quickly she had moved in with Lucas. I remembered her assumption that she was entitled to half of everything I had worked for. I drove away. 6 months later, Jake told me he'd heard through mutual acquaintances that Tessa and Lucas had broken up. Apparently, the stress of his unemployment and their financial problems had destroyed their relationship. She was working 2 part-time jobs, the call center during the day and waiting tables at night, living with a roommate she found on Craigslist. Meanwhile, I had used my forced break from day-to-day operations to consult for other transportation companies. The work was lucrative and flexible, and I discovered I enjoyed the variety. I also started dating again, carefully this time with proper legal protections in place but with genuine optimism. As for Lucas Reed, the last I heard he was selling insurance in Kansas City. Apparently, Denver marketing agencies have long memories when it comes to costly client disasters. I never responded to any of Tessa's messages. Not the texts, not the emails, not the handwritten letter that arrived on what would have been our 5th wedding anniversary. Silence, I learned, is the most powerful response of all. People sometimes ask me if I feel guilty about how things turned out for her. The answer is no. I didn't destroy Tessa's life. Her choices did that. I didn't force her to cheat, to abandon our marriage, or to assume she was entitled to assets she had never contributed to acquiring. I simply protected myself using legal tools that I had established years before I met her. The trust my father always emphasized was right. Hope for the best, but plan for the worst. In business and in life, preparation isn't paranoia, it's wisdom. And sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just letting people face the natural consequences of their own actions while you move forward with your life intact. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.